leadership team of the Interfaith Council of Franklin County, and I want to welcome you to this program entitled Building a Culture of Reparations with our featured speaker, Dr. David Raglin. So we are very grateful that all of you are here. This program has been organized by the Racial Justice Rising Reparations Committee. It's a subcommittee of Racial Justice Rising, and the Center School in Greenfield, and Racial Justice Rising, and the Interfaith Council. So it is organized by one group, but it is sponsored, hosted by 3 groups. I also want to take a moment to thank the Mass Cultural Council and the local cultural councils for part of the funding for this program. So let me say a few words about our process for tonight. We will introduce Dr. Raglin, and he will speak for 15 to 20 minutes. We will then have time for questions. We will actually have a surprise interlude after Dr. Raglin speaks. And then we will have time for questions, which hopefully will be 20, 25 minutes or so for questions. And so throughout the program, throughout the time where Dr. Raglin is speaking, if you have a question, please enter it on chat, but the chat will be open just to me. So we won't be having a whole lot of chatting going on during Dr. Raglin's talk. Toward the end, I will then open up the chat function. So because we're going to be asking people for resources, ideas, programs you're already part of, programs you want to tell others about. So we will open up the chat again towards the end. So let me just say a few other announcements. One is that this session is being recorded, and it will be viewable on the Interfaith Council YouTube page, and then it will be available through Racial Justice Rising and the Center School in Greenfield. So all 3 sponsoring groups will have copies of this program. I recommend, it's totally up to you, but I recommend that on the viewing, you go to speaker view so that you actually see the face of the people speaking, as opposed to seeing 25 faces on these pages. We have now about 118, so we have 4 or 5 pages right now. We have muted everyone. We ask you to stay muted, partly because it helps reception, so our hearing, ability to hear. And for some people, it helps their reception if they block their video, but that's up to you. You know your computers and whether that's possible on your computer, whether you need to block your video or not. So as we begin this program on reparations, I wanted to take a moment to share what is called a land acknowledgement. And this particular statement that I'm reading was originally drafted by the Nolambika Project here in Franklin County, with a little slight editing on our part just for the sake of length. We share this as a way to recognize those who lived on these lands before the time of colonization and slavery. We give thanks for the indigenous people who have stewarded the land and waters of the Connecticut River Valley for more than 15,000 years. We acknowledge that we now inhabit land that was seized, expropriated, and stolen from indigenous people, the homelands of the Pocumtuck, Nipmuc, and Abenaki, whose people and descendants still live here among us. We give thanks, and we pledge to build community and restore justice with the indigenous people of this land. And I just want to share one line, I'm borrowing it from you, Dr. Raglin, as a way to prepare ourselves for the evening. And this line is this: reparations is the midpoint between truth and reconciliation. Reparations is the midpoint between truth and reconciliation. Let's take a breath in. Let's all get ourselves present here. Forget about all the Zoom connections and everything. Let's allow ourselves to be present. Take a deep breath in. Release that breath. So I want to introduce T. Gray, who will be introducing Dr. Raglin. T. Gray is a founding member and current member of the Racial Justice Rising Coordinating Committee and a member of the Racial Justice Rising Reparations Committee, as are Jane and myself. T. Gray is off camera this evening, but she is in full voice and prepared to introduce Dr. Raglin. T. Gray.
Hello, hi, this is T. Gray. I live on the homeland of the Nipmuc people in what is now called Shutesbury, Massachusetts. Thanks, Kate, for starting us off. Just a moment, I'm going to do a screen share here. Okay. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. David Raglin. I met Dr. Ragland and his family exactly 3 years ago in Greenfield, Massachusetts, when we both showed up to attend a Poor People's Campaign event. Since then, I've been attending many of his organization's online programs, including being able to attend in person before the pandemic, one of their biannual Reparations Sunday celebrations. Dr. Raglin is one of the co-founders and co-executive directors of the Truth Telling Project. He co-founded the Truth Telling Project so that marginalized voices could be heard and move society to lay a groundwork for healing, reconciliation, and social transformation. He is the director of the Grassroots Reparations Campaign. He is a writer, a scholar, an activist, who recently published a 6-part series on reparations in Yes magazine. One of the articles is called "With Reparations, We Must Demand Repair and Heal Ourselves." He currently teaches in-depth psychology, eco-psychology, and community liberation at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Georgetown University's Advocacy Lab included Dr. Ragland's research as part of the, quote, most important research on advocacy, unquote, in the last 40 years. He was recently inducted into Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Collegium of Scholars at Morehouse College. In the past, Dr. Ragland served as the Senior Bayard Rustin Fellow at Fellowship of Reconciliation, served as a board member for the Peace and Justice Studies Association, and was the United Nations representative for the International Peace Research Association. It is a great honor to welcome Dr. Raglin tonight.
Thank you, Tigray, and thank you all for being here and having me. And I deeply appreciate the beginning honoring the indigenous ancestors, people, the non-human animals, and plant life that are also part of our ancestry. Whenever I talk, I also like to acknowledge and honor my ancestors. And I want to begin with honoring Callie House, who's a Black woman immediately after slavery, or in the 1880s, funded or started the ex-slave pension fund, because she thought that folks who had been enslaved their whole lives should be paid a pension. And because of her work, she was imprisoned because the US government said that no Black person has the capacity to create something like that, let alone a Black woman. Also want to call into this circle and conversation Ida B. Wells, the truth teller about lynching. And she wrote that the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of the truth on them. Also want to bring in Frederick Douglass, this eloquent giant and champion of abolition and anti-racism, who challenged the racism of white abolitionists with his independent thinking and creative excellence. Also want to call in James Foreman, who demanded in the Black Manifesto that white Christian and Jewish congregations pay reparations for their role in slavery and the world it created. I also want to honor my grandmothers, Moselle Miller, who picked cotton with my father until he was 13 years old in Brownsville, Tennessee. And my grandmother on my mother's side, Goldie Adams. Let all my ancestors and all of our ancestors guide our thoughts and whisper direction into our ears each moment, each day. Because reparations is not just rooted in deep values of our religious traditions and texts, Shuva, Jubilee, but spirituality, the feeling that touches us to our bones, washing over us, feeling the presence and guidance of those who came before us, our plant and non-human ancestors included, profoundly changing us and moving us to action. So the way that I talk is I try to tell stories about my life. And my education and path to thinking about reparations comes from my Black experience growing up right next to Ferguson, Missouri in St. Louis, North St. Louis, where as a result of the BBC, we know about the Delmar Divide, which is a major artery, right, that runs that north of Delmar is 90% Black and the South is a majority white. And those incomes are skewed disproportionately toward the south of Delmar, where white residents live. I went to elementary and high school in that same community where crack came and ravaged our community, my family included. And that ravaging of our communities led to the crime bill that this current president helped to usher in, that saw so many of my neighbors incarcerated. I remember years later, as I was going to prisons in Missouri to pray with people who were on death row, a man came up to me and was like, "Yo, what you doing in here?" And I just, upon reflection, thought about our two lives, how different. I attended a private school in North St. Louis with an Afrocentric education, and then I attended Wilberforce University, and then studied at Teachers College at Columbia University under the Nobel Prize nominated peace educator, Betty Reardon, where I learned and protested and organized against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and against xenophobia that came out of that. And years later, teaching at Bucknell University, and to a large degree having left St. Louis behind because of various racism I encountered, decided to come home August the 9th, 2014 for my mother's birthday and also my nephew's birthday on that same date. The date that Mike Brown Jr. was murdered by a Ferguson police officer. And that night I remember hanging out with a friend and just sharing how I had just been teaching a course where I was teaching my students and taking them to the protest in DC around the Israeli incursion into Gaza that summer. And my friend turned to me and he looked and he said, "We got our own Gaza here." Another moment, a few days later, Kajimi Powell was murdered across the street by St. Louis Police Department, murdered across the street from my parents' house. And people knew Kajimi. People knew he had developmental delays. Even the person who called the police because he had a knife said, now we know Kajimi. And a couple of days after he was killed, there was deep tension in my community. As a matter of fact, there was a standoff between the St. Louis Police Department and people in my neighborhood, my parents' neighborhood. As I stood outside of my parents' house, I got a phone call from a friend who was involved in, the kind of work and research that I've been doing. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I've been going to the protest, I might write a paper. And he said, no, what are you doing? And my work in peace education and peace and conflict studies and human rights led me with other activists to start the Truth Telling Project, rooted in truth and reconciliation, but acknowledging the ongoing harm and power dynamics that stands as an obstacle to reconciliation. But in that moment, we had to do something because we knew that truth telling is spiritual, given that it is a bearing of our soul to say what so many of us are ashamed of being victimized by. Truth telling also because it is the expression of the innermost longing for human dignity. And this brought me to the view that reparations too is spiritual. And so part of our work in truth telling was gathering folk who had been victimized by police violence to tell their stories so that we could support people learning about racism and police violence and become more empathetic and support the movements that we were working in. But really important to tell our own narratives and stories. But I remember sitting at one of the hearings in 2016 at the back of St. Mark's Church in Ferguson. And I was seeing white folks crying and seeing tears of empathy. And in my heart, I've just felt like this is not going far enough. Given the stories that people told that all have in common the same material conditions, right? The ongoing police violence rooted in slave patrols, where white Becky's calling police on Black folk for just being there. We know that's rooted in the Slave Fugitive Act, where white folk were demanded by law to secure any Black folk and hold them for the slave owners. But also the material conditions of mortgages, where Black folks are less likely to receive a mortgage, right? Even with more money on hand or better credit, as documented by the Center for Investigative Journalism. But then also one of the drummers in this ceremony, in our truth-telling ceremonies, which we held as deeply sacred, was a direct descendant from some of the Black folk who escaped the East St. Louis race massacre, which was 100 years ago from 2017. His family escaped in a rickety boat across the Mississippi River because the National Guard turned back Black folk who were crossing the footbridge away from houses being burned, Black people thrown into those burning houses and shot. And we know that from the Red Summer, during that era, so many Black folk were impacted and lynched and their property stolen. And that view led me to firmly believe that truth telling must lead to reparations. Jennifer Harvey writes, if white people want racial reconciliation, they should pay reparations. With that, we launched the Truth and Reparations campaign, first learning from our friends at NCOBRA and NARC and other groups, folks like Ivor Carruthers, and many others. And in the year 2019, we first launched and shared the idea of Reparations Sunday, because we knew that reparations hearken to our innermost spirituality, the truth of that. And we wanted to not just talk about reparations, but we wanted to do something that supported the reparations movement and build a culture of reparations. In 2019, it was also a really important year. It was 400 years since Black folk were brought to this land in chains, 50 years since the Black Manifesto, where James Forman declared that white folk, white Christians, and Jewish folk owe reparations because of their complicity and participation in slavery and the world it created. But also 40 years since the Greensboro Massacre, which led to the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission on US soil. And then 2019 was also 5 years since Mike Brown was killed. And in our efforts to teach and understand reparations, we employed the United Nations dimensions of reparations, right? It was the international human rights communities proceedings that led to this understanding that reparations is a response to gross crimes against human dignity and human rights. And in Durban, South Africa, where slavery was described as a gross violation. And those dimensions include compensation, which involves a check, right? But it's much more. It involves a check in the spirit of reparations and reparative justice, but also restitution to return what was stolen, and so much was stolen. We can talk about Black land. We can also talk about cultural appropriation. We can talk about spirituality. The next dimension is satisfaction, which speaks to education and culture shifting, right? Where we need a new culture, right? We need memorials, right? That show, like in Arkansas, right? Where there are lynching memorials that the Equal Justice Initiative helped to set up, but also healing. And that's not just, in a spiritual sense, but it's physical, the physical impact of intergenerational trauma. And think about the theft of religion. And for me, one of the most important dimensions that the United Nations mentions is guarantees of non-repeat. And I like to say that it means don't do that shit no more. But it's much deeper. What does it mean to not do the things that got here? So when I first wrote or began writing the series for Yes Magazine, I was inspired by the decoloniality scholar at Rutgers, Maldonado Torres, who points out that the state of being colonized is never separate from the ideas of war. And when we think of the ways in which wars, the wars on drugs and poverties were actually wars on people, it's easier to see the connection between reparations and peace, right? From urban renewal programs that were urban removal and then displacing people of color from their neighborhoods, to redlining, from building wealth, from the GI Bill's exclusion of Black veterans, from opportunities to the weaponization of the Fair Housing Act that I described earlier, which the Center for Investigative Journalism described as helping to gentrify Black and brown communities, even under Obama administration. But also the idea of whiteness has never been the idea of whiteness contains the idea that Black people are subhuman. And that idea is infused at the very highest level of religiosity, especially if we consider the doctrine of discovery, right? Which said that if these folks are not Christian, we can take their land and subjugate them. And so these dimensions are rooted in international law, but also rooted in the need for transformation of white folks. So the creation of a culture of reparation is about helping white persons understand their complicity and benefit from a system of harms that includes prison and the extraction and exploitation of people in capitalism, as we see in this COVID era, but also policing, which is descendant from slave system, as we've been witnessing the trial where George Floyd is on trial, right? And not the police officer who murdered him. These systems have to be abolished. And part of that abolition is viewing ourselves as not just people interested in reparations or abolition, but seeing the two connected. Reparations and abolition. Because reparations is not just beneficial to Black folk, but white folk. Not just because if we want reparations to be transformative, every white person has to have a stake in the process that is not just about cutting a check, but importantly also about cutting a check. But if we look at history, even if your ancestors didn't own slaves, they benefited from a slave system that kept free Blacks working for penny on the dollars, on every dollar earned by white folk and subjected to Northern racism, right? But then also this idea that Black people should be paid less is rooted in the imagination of Blacks as less than human. So even if your grandparents or great-grandparents immigrated to this country and you benefited from a system, they benefited from a system, and you're still benefiting from a system that your ancestors were able to benefit from the GI Bill and redlining and gentrification, where Black folks are more likely to get stopped by police, which are a matter of policy, not Black criminality. It makes you complicit. But also that most Europeans immigrated to the United States escaping some form of dehumanization and came to the United States, and instead of healing and addressing that trauma, given this false salve of whiteness. Many of you all know the work of Dr. Medria Connolly and Brian Nichols, who argue that America needs to transform the ghost of slavery and Jim Crow and even the most recent past, to transform those ghosts into ancestors. Because these ghosts, if we don't transform them, they linger and they live fully in institutions like prisons and law enforcement and policing. You know, while slavery was officially abolished, right, it still lives on in institutions like prisons. Even on this day, April 8th, 1911, there was an explosion at Banner Mine in Alabama that killed 128 men. Almost all of them were Black prisoners of the state. Many of them only committed misdemeanors or violating prohibition or vagrancy or something like that, turned into trumped up charges. But we don't even have to go back that far. All we have to do is think about the many political prisoners, right, who are still in jail today, many because of programs like COINTELPRO, where our movements were infiltrated by law enforcement, and even one political prisoner that I protested with, Josh from Ferguson, who was also developmentally delayed and sentenced 8 years for lighting a piece of plastic out of a gas station. And then Khalif Browder, right, who was in prison basically for being accused of stealing something which he did not have on him, right? when he was checked coming right after the store. And then he later committed suicide. And we're also seeing this death sentence, right, for inmates in American jails who are disproportionately Black. In St. Louis, Missouri, right now, inmates are demanding their freedom, demanding help from this death sentence of COVID. So slavery, right, reparations requires a continued work toward abolition, right? And we also have to think about the spiritual roots of slavery, right? Slavery was also justified on religious and spiritual terms, right? Not just the doctrine of discovery, but in the early 1800s, the Anglican Church created the Slave Bible that was propagated in some parts of the Deep South and the Caribbean that excluded every mention of freedom and jubilee and uprisings, leaving the Bible to about 14 chapters. We need a culture of reparations to guard against the backlash, right? That once that check is cut, once there are any movements, right, of Black freedom and liberation or any progress, that shame turns into rage. And in Frederick Douglass's prophetic words, where he was describing the unequal pay of Black soldiers who thought they had won this hard fight, right, to serve in the Union Army, they experienced backlash. And Douglass, the backlash of unequal payment. Frederick Douglass writes and said in a speech, "History giveth profound change while racism waits in the wings to take it back." So when the checks are cut, we have to know that we are building a culture of reparations, not just on Reparation Sundays, where we think about and reflect on the history of slavery and how to make some kind of symbolic repair, but rooted in reconnecting with our ancestors. After learning about our part, our complicity, our parents' part, our grandparents' racial injustice footprint, and we have to let the shame of complicity wash over us to become new people, to become reparationists, which Willard Ladevin Cobra calls reparationists the new abolitionist, which means how do we purge whiteness from our hearts to educate our communities, to teach and embody repair, not just as an intellectual exercise, but listening to our bodies when racism emerges, when whiteness emerges, when miseducations are uttered, right? To hold them and those speaking that miseducation accountable. When white folk like the ones on January the 6th rise up, right, to push us back to something else, we have to know that is because we have not embodied the change that we need to change. When pundits are saying, you got your check, now be quiet, you can speak out and tell them the truth that we don't have full reparations until we abolish the systems like capitalism, extractive capitalism, and prisons and police, that we won't have reparations until we abolish whiteness and reconnect with all of our ancestors. Then we won't be fully human enough to make repair. And I'd love to hear from my good friend, Benjamin Mertz, who's gonna help us think about and embody what I'm saying even more.
Thank you, Dr. Ragland, for that deep conversation around being an abolitionist, understanding that we're not just reformers, we are abolitionists. It doesn't need to get just better, it needs to change and transform and be fundamentally different. And there's a piece of music about this that comes from the Black spiritual tradition. My work is the uncovering of the old Black spiritual songs, the pieces of music that are the foundation of so much of American music. And there's a piece that says, hatred, we're gonna tear your kingdom down. It doesn't say, hatred, we're gonna reform your kingdom. It doesn't say, maybe we're gonna try to make it work. It says, hatred, we are going to tear your kingdom down. Racism, injustice, we are going to tear your kingdom down. And it sounds like this. Hatred, we gonna tear your kingdom down. Oh, hatred, we gonna tear your kingdom down. We gonna tear down your kingdom all over this land. Oh, hatred, we gonna tear your kingdom down. Oh, police violence, we gonna tear your kingdom down. Police violence, we gonna tear your kingdom down. We're gonna tear down your kingdom all over this land. Oh, hatred, we're gonna tear your kingdom down. Racism, we're gonna tear your kingdom down. Oh, racism, we're gonna tear your kingdom down. Oh, we're gonna tear down your kingdom all over this land. Racism, we're gonna tear your kingdom down. Because, my dear friends, we need more than just reform. We need more than just gentle and quiet conversation about how the world can be a little bit better. We need freedom fighters, what Dr. Cornel West calls love warriors, who are willing to tear down systems of oppression, who are willing to tear down racism and bigotry and evil when they see it around them. Oh, hatred, we're gonna tear your kingdom down. Singing about tearing things down, and I want to sing another song that's about holding on, because sometimes with one hand we need to tear down what is wrong, and with the other hand we need to hold on to what is good. And there's a piece of music that comes from the Black spiritual tradition sung by enslaved people that says, keep your hands on the plow and hold on, meaning keep doing the work and hold on, meaning that freedom is gonna come someday if you just keep your hands on your work and you keep pushing that plow forward and you move on and you hold on. And so while we tear down the systems of evil with one hand, with the other hand, we hold on to our work. We hold on to our values. We hold on to our vision for this world. When this piece was rewritten during the Civil Rights Movement, the text was rewritten as keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Paul and Silas bound in jail, they had no money for their bail, but keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Paul and Silas thought they lost, but the jail cell shook and the chains come off, and keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on. On the prize and hold on. Oh, Jonah brung back to land from the belly of the whale, and keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. and Daniel saved from the lions when it come out. All right, I keep my eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. During the civil rights movement, they used to say it this way: the only chain that I can stand is the chain of hand in hand. I'm gonna keep my eyes on the prize and hold on. I'm gonna ride that old greyhound and spread this love from town to town. Gonna keep my eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold. And the ancestors long ago said, keep your hands on the plow, oh Lord, and hold. Keep your head on the plow and hold. Keep your head on the plow and hold. I'm gonna keep my hand on the plow. I'm gonna keep my eyes on the prize and hold, understanding that there is a moral obligation to save my fellow human beings living in distress. I'm gonna keep my hand on the plan. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold. Keep your head on the plow and hold. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. That was so beautiful. What a beautiful message. Beautiful music.
Thank
Beautiful
you so
voice.
much for inviting me and having me here as a piece of this evening, as a part of this event, to bring this beautiful and important ancestral music and all of the power and the wisdom that it holds. Yeah, my role as someone who has inherited that music, I take very, very seriously. It is the only living documents, this music representing so many millions of people whose lives are not accounted for in our history books. And yet they sang songs to their children and songs to their children's children and handed down a musical legacy. And it is my honor to bring it to you tonight.
Thank you. I hear you. And thank you so much, Dr. Ragland, for helping us understand better the complexities of what reparations entails. Now we will pass the program over to Jane.
Thank you, T. Gray. Hi, I'm Jane Stevenson, and I serve on the Reparations Committee of Racial Justice Rising, and I also am on the Justice, Equity, and Diversity Committee of the Center School. So, Dr. Ragland, we have about half an hour right now with questions, and we had a lot of questions in our pre-registration. They were all so good. And probably Kate is fielding questions right now as we speak. So I know there's no chance we're going to get through all of them. But in the interim, we're going to go ahead and start. And I can tell you that a lot of people wanted to know, they wanted their hand on the plow and they wanted the other hand to be tearing down the institution. They wanted to know, like, what can I do today? And specifically, people were interested in knowing what your take on individual payment of individual reparations and community-based reparation accounts. What's your take on that kind of action?
Sure. I mean, I think it's important, but I also think it has to be grounded in deep education and connection to ancestors. And I think you can do both. Like what my friend Ladi Dula, who runs the website Reparations for Slavery, is a person who found on one side of her family, she's Jewish. On the other side of her family, she is pretty much blue blood, right? She had one family member who seventh great grandparent removed, or not even, like, was the founder of the state of Maryland, and his son was the founder of slavery in Maryland, right? But then so there's all of these different connections. So I think connecting with your ancestors, finding what is your own racial justice footprint. And if you go to that website, she runs a year-long program for white folk, right, to help them think deeply about this work. If you're already been doing some of this work, we have a course called Building a Culture of Reparations. If you go to grassrootsreparations.org. But I do believe that what Movement for Black Lives has called cash payments by individual white people is resource, I'm blanking right now, but it's basically like redistribution of resources. But redistributions of resource can be reparative. And the most important part of that is having a reparative relationship, entering into that in terms of your own education, and not seeing this as charity, but as part of what you owe, because the government does owe reparations, right? At local, federal, state levels, right? For their complicity and benefit from slavery. Businesses owe reparations, but also individuals owe reparations because the government didn't set aside land or give land or GI Bills to other governments. They gave them to individuals who directly benefited. But also reparations is deep. And if you have a reparative relationship with someone, right, with a group of people who are supporting multiple community members and generations, I think that is beautiful. And what we've tried to do in the Grassroots Reparations campaign is educate about that. And one of our partners in the campaign, Psychoanalysis for Social Responsibility, developed a relationship with one of our activists because he was finishing his PhD in psychology, so he can work in his community and couldn't afford to finish it. And so they're supporting him through that doctoral process. And then there's some other things as well. Like I'm a part of a community that is building an intentional community right in Franklin County. And that's listed on Grassroots Reparations website. And we want people to enter in engaged network and relationship with us, and ritual and journeying with us. So it's not just about checking a list and making oneself feel better, but let's journey together, right? Let's tear it down and build at the same time, but enter it fully or getting that education. And there's a pledge, if you go to our reparations website, that you can take that also helps to inform people. And a previous iteration of that was used by the First Church of Cambridge, like for the entire, like, or a big part of the congregation, where they grappled with what that means, right? Which has different elements about how do I enter into this journey.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And just before anyone starts worrying that they're going to lose track of all these things that Dr. Raglin is recommending, T. Gray later on is going to highlight these, and then you'll get an email next week with a list of all the things that Dr. Raglin has referred to, so that you don't have to, get distracted right now to write things down. I have another question for you. We have a lot of families on this call, people with young children, and they're curious to know if you have recommendations for how to build a culture of reparations with children.
So, I think that's a beautiful question. And I think definitely books like Anti-Racist Babies, but also like bringing your child to events like this. And I think, one of the most beautiful kind of things that I attended was it was called the Neighborhood Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was before we had officially launched our Reparations Sundays programming. And we had a whole weekend conference about the Black Manifesto, but and I'll forward you all this later, but the pastor at that church had a beautiful sermon at the Sunday school about slavery and reparations. And we have to know that, like, telling the truth to our kids, like, sure, there's some developmental, right, phases, you don't want to talk about, certain things at certain ages, but like, there are ways to like do developmentally appropriate truthfulness in history to your kids. And even if something isn't developmental appropriate, it is better to tell the truth than let a lie and miseducation stand. And so part of that is working with schools to reinforce certain types of education. So one of the most important reparations cases in the United States was in Chicago, where John Burge operated a torture chamber for Black men for over 20 years that ended in the early 90s. And a group of activists ran a Reparations Now campaign. And that information came to light. And part of the reparations were direct cash payments to the surviving folks who were tortured and some of their descendants. But I'm not going to say the more important work, but the equally important work was the creation of the Chicago Torture Justice Center and mandating that piece be in the curriculum in Chicago. And so from Sunday school curriculum to education, but also ritual. Like, how do we create ritual around repair within our own spiritual traditions? That is a part of our calendar, right? That this history that we don't talk about fills up our calendar, and we're hoping to create that soon. And let me just say one last thing. When we created the Reparations Sunday, Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb gave us the idea to not just have the Sunday, right, which is twice a year, one in August, one in December, rooted around really significant days, but also to have a period of preparation. And so, for instance, June 19th or Juneteenth begins the period of preparation for Reparations Sunday, right, this August 22nd. And on June 19th, we're doing a national call out for faith communities and communities of conscience to do a night of 1,000 conversations where you're engaging your community in conversation. And we'll be releasing a toolkit for facilitators and holding a training. And every other Wednesday, the next one is on the next one is April the 21st. We have a reparationist ceremony. If you go to our website under reparationist, you can register for a ceremony where one of the world-renowned Yoruba priestesses, Louisa Tish, leads us in a ceremony about beginning the path to be a reparationist. And with that comes with newsletters and all kinds of ways to stay engaged and look at this from a spiritual perspective, right? But also culture shifting as well.
Oh, very cool. And kids I know are really interested in finding heroes. And so that's a way to plug into that kind of drive. Thanks so much. Kate, do you have some questions for Dr. Raglin?
Yes, actually, a lot of questions have come in. I'm picking one out. This is from Rachel Talbot Ross. She says, I'm a Black legislator from Maine, and I have a bill before the legislature to form a TRC process to not only address the healing that Dr. Raglin mentioned, but also reparations. Any advice for how to do this work so it's embedded in law policy?
Sure. I wrote with a number of transitional justice experts an article called 10 Lessons We Learned About Truth and Reconciliation. When we started what essentially was a quasi-truth process in Ferguson around police violence, we worked directly with the folks from the Greensboro Truth Commission. Mm-hmm. We also worked directly with international experts like Eduardo Gonzalez's and the Center for Transitional Justice. And it's really powerful that you're being explicit about naming reparations that is a part of any reconciliation process. In case folks don't know, when we think about truth and reconciliation, the practitioners in this area have called it transitional justice. And it was really created as a vehicle for the many nations, right, who may had a dictator, right, often funded by the US or some Western power, who is ending that or trying to transition away from that to more like a legal framework. And so the elements of transitional justice are truth-telling, accountability, right, where people are accountable for that. Truth-telling, accountability, criminal prosecution for folk, because people have to be held responsible. And although we're working on abolishing those systems, what does a new system, right, look like? Where people feel like a sense of justice has happened. And then also reparations and truth seeking. And truth seeking is a formal process of like gathering that information, like checking on testimony and stuff like that. But I can connect you to some of the folks that I've worked with and currently connected to some of the people who led the Wabanaki boarding school truth commission as well. So kudos for you in that work, and however I can support.
Thank you. Should I do one more, Jane, from the audience? Yeah. So a number of the questions that have been coming in refer to the fact that this area particularly is a pretty predominantly white area, as it was part of the question, the previous question about the state of Maine. So it's framed different ways, but here it is. Where is the ritual and ceremony in creating a culture of apology and repair in your local community, especially a community of predominantly white people?
So the ritual, I mean, let me put it like this. I think part of it is educating folks and educating yourselves to move beyond whiteness. It's deeply important that folk understand that whiteness was a creation so as to create a wedge between power holding elite white people or Europeans, landowners, and poor white people. So the introduction of blacks were like, at least you're not a nigger. And so there was that direct imposition. And so like part of it is to acknowledge that in your grandmother's recipes and stories are ritual or elements of ceremony. When I went to Standing Rock with Buddhist Peace Fellowship to essentially pray and be there as water protectors fought against the violation of that land, every morning there was a water ceremony, and I expected something magical. I expected something like, right? And what I got was an elder telling stories about his life. And it reverberated and came back to the folks in Ferguson telling stories about their life. That the everyday is sacred. And if we view it as sacred and we make rituals around that, rituals around harvest, planting time, full moon, around honoring the planet around you, around honoring the maple trees that the sap comes from. You know, in the intentional community that we're moving out of, every March we had a ceremony where, because we made maple syrup, you know, honoring and remembering the indigenous stories and why, you know, Mother Earth gave indigenous folks, right, the ability to have something in the deepest part of winter. So they're all around us, and the work is delving into that. That's the journey. And there's a great book by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer called Braiding Sweet Grass that we used as also part of that ceremony as well.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you. We had a bunch of questions come in from different people who are part of reparation groups. And a lot of them have to do with this question that I'm going to kind of phrase here. Someone said, I'm part of a reparation group. We are all white or white passing. We know that part of our work is to educate and motivate other white people, but we also realize that we need to nurture accountability partnerships with BIPOC folks and Black and Brown led organizations. Do you have advice about how to foster these relationships?
You know, for me, like being involved in the movement for Black Lives, the protest movement of Ferguson, like came at a time where I didn't have trust for white folk. And part of it was showing up and doing what people ask you to do. That's within your capacity, right? And if it's not, finding ways to connect folks to what that is. And I think listening, and sometimes if people want you to mop the floor. Don't try to give a speech. There was an academic who I was, really good friends with, and she came to Ferguson with us during, it was like during one of the major gatherings, and the local organizers said, don't talk to media, white people. And the first thing she did was talk to media. So part of it is showing up and doing what people ask you to do. And you may be a neuroscientist, but your presence and support is often more needed. And when people tell you what they need, don't pivot if you're not willing to do it. Right? I I think I was talking about something that our community need when somebody asked me, and the person pivoted, like literally, and I was just like, oh, okay, right. So part of it is like showing up with integrity and doing some work on yourself before you show up. So, these are just some sort of basic stuff, right?
That's great. There's a lot of a kind of follow-up question that came up too, was people expressing that they realize that Black and brown people should not have to do the heavy lifting in this work, that it's really our job as white people to do it. And are there ways to compensate or reciprocate with Black and brown leaders for helping us kind of stay on track?
I mean, when you work with a Black or brown organizer, it's a matter of social justice that they be paid something decent and not be expected to do this plus this to get something measly. Often, we, Black and brown organizers will show up in solidarity and do things and support because we believe in it. But, payment is often a matter of social justice. And my philosophy is when I work with anybody, right? Particularly Black and brown folk, you're getting paid.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. That's great. Kate, how about you?
I wanted to, I'm joining two questions together, and it's about money. One is, if someone has $100 to donate, what's the best way to direct it? How about 1,000? How about 10,000? How about 100,000? And the other question I would just add in with it is sending financial support to reparations organizations like Grassroots Reparations Campaign and COBRA considered reparations?
So that's a very deep question. And let me just start by thinking about it like this. The reason why there's so much difficulty around talking around money, particularly around white folks and particularly around white wealth holders, is because many, if there are some on this call, you've been taught that it is yours by right, that the entire system is built around maintaining that wealth, right? Maintaining and passing it on to a different generation, to the next generation. And so it takes a lot of work to help people transfer that wealth to groups who are doing transformational work. But some people are maybe there. And I think that, so for instance, the work of Grassroots Reparations, like I look at, because I also am a person who donates, what I have to organizers around me that I believe in. And I look at, are they working with other people, right? Are they committed to the community? What are their values? And as part of the Grassroots Reparations campaign was launched by Truth Telling Project in COBRA and Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth and Fellowship, like organizations like that, right? And COBRA has a lot of integrity. And they have served and continue to serve as elders, and they are not supported in ways that they should be. And then similarly, like, the work that Grassroots Reparations is doing is similar, not supported in ways that they should be. So I think that if you have $100, 1,000, 10,000, these are beautiful organizations to support as well. And also, like, what's happening in this moment I think it's important to support Black land sovereignty. There's a group called Susu Collective that is on the border of Vermont and Brattlesboro that's raising money. There's also Soul Fire Farm. And the community that we're building, if you go to cabilio.org, we are in the process of trying to purchase a piece of land. And many of you all may know this group from Spirit Fire, that retreat center for about 30 of us who are, some of us are needing to leave an intentional community that's closing. But, you know, explore that. These are all amazing pieces to explore in the spirit of repair and journeying with folk.
Awesome. That is great. Thank you so much. Yael Rosenblum wrote in to say it would be helpful to have all these, the names of all these organizations put in the chat. I just want everyone to know that you will get a follow-up email next week with all of this information in it. So, and you're going to get a little bit more information directly. Dr. Raglin, we're pretty much done with the questions part, even though there are about 400 billion more questions for you. So, you know, we'll have to take this up again when we get to see you again. But are there any last words you'd like to share with us before we go into the next part of the program, which is sharing some reparation actions that people can take today, tomorrow, and next week?
I think in finding ways to embody what you're learning and connecting with your ancestors. And, you know, some of the ways you can embody it is breathing deeply, it's humming along, right? When you sing it, it's listening to the song in your heart, is listening to the whispers that you feel in like the silent time, listening to your body. You know, something happened to me the other day that was really about it, you know, a small little piece of integrity, right? You know, that has to do with my own grappling with misogyny, and my heart began racing. And I'm sorry I didn't listen to my heart at that moment. But I talked about it with my therapist and my partner. But that is what we have to do, you know, and I can tell you because I didn't do it, and sometimes I don't. And sometimes, you know, when you feel it, you know, when your skin is crawling, notice how you feel. Notice what's coming up. If a place is unsafe, maybe that's not the place to speak out, right? But when can it be that? What's your strategy for doing that? I'm gonna say that I believe that we are headed to darker times, like in this nation. You know, with over 144 bills that have been presented to restrict voter rights. And I think that this is the time when we have to build and learn how to be abolitionist, because it will be dark times, but we will prevail. I believe that there is a moral arc toward justice. I can feel it in my bones. My ancestors are telling me that this is what we're working for. My ancestors told me to go out and request that which they did not receive. So this is that time. Thank you all.
My goodness, thank you. All right, Tigray, take it away.
Okay, hi. Thank you, Jane and Kate and Dr. Raglin, for that wisdom, a lot of wisdom you just shared with us. I'm going to move us along to actions, and just bear with me for a moment, and I can pull up the screen here. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna just take a deep breath right now, listening to what Dr. Raglin said, and invite you to do the same. All right. We will offer some actions people can take to build the culture of reparations. These are highlights of some actions, and as Jane mentioned, we will send you more detailed information later. The first item is we can continue learning about reparations and how it's defined. We can read Dr. Raglin's Yes Magazine series he wrote a 6-part series on the topic, and it includes, the part 1 includes mention about the United Nations definitions of reparations, and it also includes suggestions of spiritual reparations actions that can be taken. Check out, Dr. Raglin mentioned this earlier, Reparations for Slavery website. This is a source. This is a resource that offers support for white folks to find their ancestors and understand their complicity. We can take a course called Building a Culture of Reparations, the Historical, Spiritual, Conceptual, and Practice of Redressing, offered by Dr. Raglin's group. The next course starts April 18th. For those of us that are able, we can financially support reparations organizations like Dr. Raglin's organization, Grassroots Reparations Campaign, and NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. For those of you not familiar, this is a premier reparations organization that has been around for more than 30 years. We can also support resource redistribution. Dr. Raglin is a member of a Black and queer-led intentional community that is relocating to Western Massachusetts. He mentioned this briefly earlier, called Kibilio. Due to the pandemic, some members of the community are losing their housing. You can find more information about this on their website. And there is a very generous invitation of coming to an open ceremony on April 26th, which is not that far away. Another opportunity for resource redistribution is with the Northeast Farmers of Color organization. Here's their website. Land gifts and donations are welcome. The final suggestion is to support the HR 40 reparations bill. Check to see if your U.S. representative is a co-sponsor. You can go online and find out if your legislator has sponsored this bill. For example, in Massachusetts, there are 9 U.S. representatives. And just today, I went to check at this website here, the status of our representatives, and found out that as of April 5th, just 3 days ago, the last representative, Seth Moulton, here in Massachusetts, signed on as a co-sponsor for the HR 40 bill. So all 9 representatives in Massachusetts have now co-sponsored this bill. Really something to celebrate. I say this because as a point of reference, when I started to closely follow the HR 40 bill about 3 years ago, there were no co-sponsors from Massachusetts. And across the US, there were only 32 co-sponsors. And now today, when I check that website, there are 174. So the momentum is building, and this is great news. I will end here and pass the program back to Jane.
Awesome. Thank you, Tigray. So exciting. I love that news about HR 40. So we're going to just close out this program. We will for sure be done by 8:30. We want to invite you to do something that we call joyful actions. And I think the chat's going to open back up. Thanks so much for coming together to do this important work. Dr. Ragland, thank you, thank you, thank you. Benjamin Murch, thank you, thank you, thank you. Tomorrow, everyone who registered will get an email, and in it will be a survey asking you to evaluate the program. We would be so grateful if you would do that. Only will take 1 to 3 minutes. And then next week, you're going to get another email with all the good stuff, all the juicy goods. To close our program, we're going to do something that we do in the Racial Justice Rising Reparations Committee. At the end of each of our meetings, we meet twice a month, and at the end of each of our meetings, we do something called Joyful Actions Commitments, where we go around and each share with each other what we're going to do in the next 2 weeks toward reparations. And it's a great way to end the meeting with a hopeful kind of feeling. And it's also a great way to keep ourselves accountable for this work and to keep our hand on the plow, and the other hand destroying what needs to be destroyed. So we're going to invite you to write into the chat what you will commit to doing in the next month, let's say, a joyful action that you will do to bring about the change that is necessary right now. You are welcome to, if you are already engaged in reparation work, to let us know what you're doing, and that can help share the joy. And also, you're welcome to just hang out and watch the chat. It might be very inspirational. If you want to peace out and go to bed, we understand and we support that. Just know that you'll be hearing from us again really soon. So thanks so much for joining us. And please write in the chat with your joyful action for the next month.
So I'm reading over some of these. Planting a reparations plot to the farm to send to Susu, that's the organization in Brattleboro. Get in touch with Cabilio. Talk to 5 people about what I'm learning. I will post this program on YouTube. I'm excited to check out in Cobra, find out why S1083 has not been reintroduced in the Senate this year. Reading Dr. Raglin's articles in Yes, checking out all the websites and decide what my next steps will be. That's good. What else? I'm going to go on Reparations for Slavery to learn more about my ancestors, sign up for the grassroots reparation course. I'm going to call in my ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
I think myself, I want to hum. Someone said S1083 is now S40. I don't know. Find out. I can't read that one.
There's also someone who's written in to say that they will lead a conversation with students. They seem to be a teacher, and that is another great action.
Continue with my church's ancestry and whiteness exploration. I will say that when you get the mailing from us next week, one thing it's going to ask is if you're interested in some kind of ongoing conversation or group, to let us know. We don't have anything set up, but if there was enough response, we would try to do something about that. Read the book From Here to Equality. Talk to my Buddhist group about what we can do as a group. Connect with Indigenous people and try to connect Dr. Raglin with the conference in mid-May on transformation and restorative justice. The woman from the legislator from Maine asked if she could share this program with the Maine legislators. I think that's a question to you, Dr. Raglin. I think it's okay with us. I will send financial reparations to friends in Springfield. Donate my stimulus check to a reparations organization. Western Mass Surge is collecting reparations for Nipmuc Nation. Go to the April 26th celebration. There is a Northampton's Reparations Committee. There's an Amherst Reparations Committee. So it's about 10:30. It is really fun I mean, 8:30. It's really fun to watch you all. Let me see, is Dr. Ragland still here? Do I see him?
We have a question about this recording of this program. Yes, the link for that will be sent to you next week, along with the big juicy list of all the things you can do. And yes, you can share it.
So I just want to say thank you again for being here, all of you, and your enthusiasm and the questions and your we've gotten a lot of feedback already, and we look forward to having you fill out the survey and be as specific. Don't fill out the whole thing if you don't want, but be specific about things that are important to you, and whether you want to connect with the Interfaith Council or the Center School or Racial Justice Rising. All those will be options in the mailing that we'll send you. Because you registered, we have your addresses. So I just want to thank you all. I want to thank the working group that put this together. Particularly, I want to thank Tigray and Jane. And Dr. Raglin is magnificent. And I think we're so lucky that he was here with us tonight. And blessings to all of you. We'll keep the chat open for a few more minutes, but the program is officially over. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.